He didn't just slap a widow, he silenced an entire diner. Coffee dripping, glasses shattered, her cheek burning red, and then the door chimed. The bully turned, already smirking until he saw the tattooed man in the coat, the one whose shadow froze the air. Her Mafia boss son stepped inside, and the question hanging in the room was simple, lethal, and unavoidable. Who walks out alive? If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. The air in Frost Peak, Colorado carried the crisp, crystalline bite of early winter. It was mid-October, and the mountains that cradled this isolated town wore a crown of white-capped peaks against an impossibly blue sky. The valleys below were still dressed in autumn's final act, gold aspens shimmering like coins scattered across evergreen slopes, and morning frost clinging stubbornly to windowsills and fence posts until the sun burned it away in silvery wisps. The scent of pine smoke and cold stone filled the lungs with every breath. This was the sanctuary Elena Marino had been longing for. Elena, a woman of 79 with fine silver hair swept back in a modest bun, and eyes that held both gentleness and the unspoken weight of decades lived, adjusted the cream-colored cardigan draped over her shoulders. She was a widow, a woman who had buried the love of her life, raised a son under circumstances few could imagine, and survived with the kind of quiet dignity that often gets mistaken for weakness. But beneath that soft exterior was a foundation of forged iron, tempered by love, loss, and the fierce protection of family. That son, Alberico, had recently insisted she leave the city behind. He'd purchased a beautiful lakeside cabin on the edge of Frost Peak, secluded, peaceful, his way of saying she'd earned her rest. This visit was supposed to be her sanctuary. She pushed open the heavy glass door of Pinridge Diner, and a small brass bell chimed above her head. The diner was the beating heart of Frost Peak, a humble gathering place with scuffed wooden booths, red vinyl seats patched with duct tape, and the mouth-watering aroma of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and buttered toast hanging thick in the air. It was exactly the kind of place Elena loved, honest, warm, and unpretentious. Behind the counter, a young woman named Rosie Calder moved with practiced grace, balancing plates and refilling mugs with the kind of rhythm that only comes from years of service. Rosie was in her mid-20s, with soft brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and hazel eyes that noticed everything, the couple arguing quietly in the corner booth, the trucker nursing his third coffee, the tension that sometimes crept into this small town like fog rolling down the mountains. She had grown up here, understood Frost Peak's unspoken rules, and had learned when to speak and when to stay silent. She glanced up as Elena entered and offered a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Morning, ma'am. Just you today?" "Just me, dear," Elena replied softly, her voice carrying the faint traces of an East Coast accent she'd never fully lost. Elena slid into a corner booth near the window, where she could watch the mountains catch the morning light. Rosie brought her a steaming mug of coffee without asking. Elena had been coming here every morning for 2 weeks, and routines form quickly in small towns. "The usual?" Rosie asked. "Please." The diner hummed with quiet morning conversation. Retired miners debated football scores. A mother tried to convince her toddler that pancakes required syrup, not ketchup. Silverware clinked against ceramic plates. It was peaceful, normal. Then the door slammed open. Wade Kempler filled the doorway like a storm cloud taking human shape. He was a mountain of a man over 6 feet tall, barrel-chested, with a red face that seemed perpetually flushed with anger or alcohol or both. His work jacket hung open despite the cold, revealing a stained flannel shirt stretched tight across his gut. His boots hit the floor with deliberate heaviness, announcing his presence, demanding attention. The diner's warmth evaporated instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the toddler stopped whining. Wade's eyes scanned the room with predatory intent until they locked onto Elena's small frame tucked into the corner booth. His mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile on a kinder man. He walked straight toward her, his boots leaving dirty prints on the worn linoleum. "Mrs. Marino," he said, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a man who enjoys power. "We need to talk about your property." Elena's hands wrapped around her coffee mug, seeking its warmth. "I've already told you, Mr. Kempler. I'm not selling." "See? That's where you're confused." Wade leaned one thick hand on her table, looming over her. "This ain't a negotiation anymore. Mayor Pike wants that land. Victor Drayton needs that land. and what they want, they get. You understand? I understand perfectly, Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear beginning to crawl up her spine. And my answer remains no. Wade's face darkened. The false friendliness evaporated like morning frost under a blowtorch. You stubborn old. His hand shot out and swept Elena's coffee mug across the table. Hot liquid splashed across the booth, soaking into the vinyl and dripping onto her lap. Elena gasped, pulling back, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped in the corner. You think you're special? Wade's voice rose to a roar. You think you can ignore us? His massive hand grabbed Elena's face, fingers digging cruelly into her weathered cheek, and then he slapped her. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot. Elena's head snapped sideways. Her glasses flew from her face, clattering across the table. She slumped against the booth's edge, one trembling hand rising to her reddening cheek. The entire diner froze. 30 people sat in absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody helped. Wade straightened, breathing hard, a sick satisfaction spreading across his features. He was untouchable, protected, the king of his small, corrupt kingdom. The bell above the door chimed. The sound was soft, almost musical, completely at odds with the violence still echoing in the air. Every head turned. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. Tall, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders beneath a tailored black overcoat that fell past his knees. His hair was dark and swept back, but it was the tattoos that made people's breath catch. Intricate dark ink crawled up from his collar, wrapping around his throat and disappearing beneath his jaw. More ink decorated his hands, visible even from across the room. He didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't posture. He simply stepped inside, his eyes scanning the frozen tableau before him, the spilled coffee, the scattered glasses, his mother's trembling shoulders, and Wade Kempler's hand still raised in the air. Those eyes were dark, cold, and absolutely merciless. The air in the diner changed. It became heavier, harder to breathe, as if a predator had just entered a cage full of prey. Alberico Angelo's gaze locked onto Wade Kempler, with the focused intensity of a man who had decided exactly how someone was going to suffer. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, and more terrifying than any scream could ever be. Take your hand off my mother. If seeing an elderly woman hurt in front of silent bystanders breaks your heart too, please hit subscribe. Stories like this remind us why we must never stay silent. Wade Kempler's hand dropped to his side, as if the air itself had turned to ice around his wrist. His confident smirk faltered, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like confusion. He turned slowly toward the doorway, ready to dismiss whoever dared interrupt his moment of power. Then he saw him. Alberico Angelo stood just inside the entrance, perfectly still, his dark overcoat hanging open to reveal a crisp black shirt beneath. But it wasn't the expensive clothes that made Wade's throat tighten, it was the ink. Dark, intricate tattoos crawled up the man's neck from his collar, disappearing beneath his jawline in patterns that weren't decorative. They were territorial. Markers of allegiance. Symbols that men in certain circles recognized immediately and feared instinctively. Wade had seen those markings before, years ago, in a bar outside Denver where enforcers from Eastern crime families had passed through. He'd heard the whispered stories. The Angelo family, old-world mafia, the kind of people who didn't make threats, they made examples. His mouth went dry. Alberico's shoulders were angled forward slightly, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet, the posture of a man who knew exactly how much damage his body could inflict, and was calmly calculating the most efficient method. His eyes, dark and pitiless, tracked Wade's every micro-movement with the cold precision of a predator assessing wounded prey. He took 3 slow steps into the diner. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots. Nobody else made a sound. The retired miners at the counter stared down at their eggs as if eye contact alone might drag them into whatever was about to happen. The mother pulled her toddler closer, covering the child's eyes. A traveling salesman in a cheap suit slid lower in his booth, suddenly fascinated by the menu he'd already ordered from. Rosie stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot trembling in her hand, but her eyes were sharp, watching, recording every detail with the instinct of someone who understood she was witnessing something important. I said, Alberico repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow filling every corner of the diner. Take your hand off my mother. Wade's bravado cracked like thin ice over deep water. Now hold on, this is just business. Your mother, she's being unreasonable about some property and you put your hands on her. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. delivered with the finality of a judge reading a sentence. Wade took a step backward, his boot heel catching on the leg of Elena's booth. "Listen, I didn't know she had family. Mayor Pike, he just wanted... You threw coffee on her." Alberico's gaze never wavered, never blinked. "You grabbed her face. You struck her." Each sentence landed like a hammer blow. Wade's face, already red from exertion and anger, now flushed deeper with genuine fear. His hands came up in a placating gesture that looked more like surrender. I was just trying to make her understand." "Understand what?" Alberico moved closer, closing the distance between them with measured, unhurried steps. "That you're protected? That the mayor owns the sheriff? That corruption makes you brave?" The diner door burst open again, and Sheriff Mace Harlan strode in with the manufactured confidence of a man used to being the biggest authority in the room. He was in his late 50s, with a gut that strained against his uniform shirt and a face that had settled into permanent lines of casual cruelty. His hand rested on his service weapon, not drawing it, but making sure everyone noticed it was there. "All right, that's enough." Harlan's voice boomed with false authority. "I got a call about a disturbance. Somebody want to tell me what's going on here?" Wade practically lunged toward him with relief. "Sheriff, thank God. This guy just came in here threatening me. He's my son," Elena said quietly from her booth, finally finding her voice. One hand still pressed against her reddening cheek, but her eyes were dry and steady. "He's my son, Sheriff Harlan, and he watched Mr. Kempler assault me." Harlan's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, calculation, irritation. His gaze swept over Alberico, taking in the expensive coat, the tattoos, the absolute stillness that marked him as something far more dangerous than the usual troublemakers Harlan dealt with. "That true, Wade?" Harlan asked, his tone already suggesting he'd find a way to spin whatever answer came next. "She was refusing to cooperate with..." "Did you strike her?" Alberico's voice cut through Wade's explanation like a blade through paper. Wade's mouth opened and closed uselessly. Harlan's hand tightened on his weapon. "Now hold on. I don't know who you think you are, son, but in Frost Peak, I'm the law, and I'm telling you to calm down and step back before this situation escalates." Alberico's head tilted slightly, his gaze shifting to the sheriff with the same cold assessment he'd given Wade. For 3 long seconds, he simply stared. Then recognition flickered across Harlan's face, not of Alberico personally, but of what those tattoos meant. The Angelo crown beneath his left ear, the serpent coiled around his right wrist, symbols that carried weight in criminal circles across 3 states. The sheriff's confidence wavered. Alberico reached into his coat pocket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out his phone. He raised it slightly, letting Harlan see the screen clearly. 32 witnesses, Alberico said softly, including the young woman behind the counter who's been recording since your deputy walked in. The assault is documented. The corruption you're about to attempt is being documented. Rosie's hands trembled as she lowered the phone she'd been holding at chest height, angled toward the booth. But she didn't delete anything. Her finger hovered over the screen, ready to upload. Behind Alberico, still seated in the corner booth near the bathroom, a middle-aged man in hiking gear held his own phone steady, the red recording light barely visible but unmistakable to anyone looking. The videos had already begun uploading to social media. Alberico's expression never changed. He simply stepped to his mother's side, helping her stand with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands marked with so much ink. "We're leaving," he said quietly, speaking only to Elena. "I'll take care of everything." And in those 4 words, "I'll take care of everything," the entire diner understood that justice was coming to Frost Peak. It just wouldn't be the legal kind. By sunrise the next morning, the diner assault had exploded across the internet like wildfire through dry timber. Rosie's video, shaky but brutally clear, showed everything. Wade's hand striking Elena's face, the coffee mug flying, the elderly woman's glasses scattering across the table. And then, in the video's final 30 seconds, the doorway filled with Alberico's silhouette, his tattooed neck visible as he stepped into the light, his voice carrying that single devastating command: "Take your hand off my mother." The traveling hiker's footage offered a different angle, wider, more cinematic, capturing the entire diner's frozen paralysis and Sheriff Harlan's obvious discomfort when he recognized what those tattoos meant. 3 million views by midnight, 8 million by dawn. The hashtags multiplied: number Frost Peak Bully, number Justice for Elena, number Mafia Justice, number Protect Our Elders. Journalists from Denver, Salt Lake City, and even national networks began making calls. Local news vans appeared on Frost Peak's Main Street by 9 a.m., their satellite dishes rising like strange flowers against the mountain backdrop. Mayor Ronald Pike stood behind a hastily assembled podium outside the town hall, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression arranged into practiced concern. Behind him, the American flag and Colorado state flag fluttered in the cold morning breeze, props carefully positioned to suggest authority and righteousness. "The incident at Pinneridge Diner yesterday was unfortunate," Pike began, his voice smooth as riverstone. "But let's be clear, Mrs. Marino has been aggressively refusing to engage in good-faith negotiations regarding property development that would benefit this entire community." Mr. Kempler's frustration, while regrettable, came from months of stonewalling, and a reporter cut him off. "Mayor Pike, the video shows him striking a 79-year-old woman. Are you seriously blaming the victim?" Pike's smile tightened. "I'm providing context that the viral videos conveniently omit." But the internet wasn't buying it. Comment sections flooded with outrage. Armchair investigators began pulling threads, connecting dots, asking uncomfortable questions about why a small-town bully felt so confident assaulting an elderly woman in public. Inside Elena's lakeside cabin, far from the media circus, a different kind of storm was building. The living room had been transformed overnight. Laptops covered the coffee table, their screens glowing with maps, financial documents, and surveillance feeds. A large monitor mounted on the wall displayed a detailed property map of Frost Peak Valley, with Elena's cabin marked in red, surrounded by dozens of other parcels, some highlighted in yellow, others in green. Alberico stood before the map, his coat draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up to reveal more ink running down his forearms. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was set in a way Elena recognized from his childhood, the look he wore when he decided something was going to happen, and nothing would stop it. Elena sat in her favorite armchair, a blanket across her lap, her face still bearing the faint shadow of Wade's handprint, despite the ice she'd applied through the night. She held a cup of tea in both hands, watching her son with maternal concern that went deeper than the bruise on her cheek. "Tell me everything," Alberico said quietly, not turning from the map. "Start from the beginning." Elena took a slow breath. "It began about 6 months ago. A man named Victor Drayton came to town, a real estate developer from California. He started buying properties around the valley. Small parcels at first, an old ranch here, a closed gas station there. People were happy to sell. The offers were generous. Too generous," Alberico said. "Yes," Elena nodded. "Then the offers became pressure. Drayton's people, Wade Kempler among them, started visiting holdouts. At first it was just conversation. Then it became harassment. Late-night phone calls, livestock getting loose, fences cut. One family woke up to find their water supply contaminated." Alberico's hands curled into fists. "The sheriff did nothing," Elena continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Mayor Pike held town meetings claiming it was all progress, that Frost Peak needed economic development. He kept talking about a luxury resort, a casino, jobs for everyone. And your property? The last piece they need. My cabin sits on the western edge of the development zone. Without it, their plans can't move forward. The topography requires access through my land for utilities, roads, everything." Alberico turned finally, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" The question hung in the air between them, not accusatory, just genuinely confused. Elena's expression softened with the complicated love only a mother can hold for a son whose protection comes wrapped in violence. "Because I know what you are, my darling boy. I know what you do. And I was trying to handle this without," she gestured vaguely, "without that world touching this place. That world just slapped you across the face in front of 30 witnesses, Mama." The endearment so rarely used, so carefully preserved for private moments, landed between them with devastating gentleness. "I should have come sooner," Alberico said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I should have been here. You're here now." The cabin door opened without knocking, and a man stepped inside, tall, lean, in his mid-50s with iron-gray hair, and the kind of face that had seen everything twice and been impressed by none of it. He wore dark slacks and a wool sweater that somehow still looked expensive despite its simplicity. "Vittorio," Alberico acknowledged without turning. Vittorio Dante, consigliere to the Angelo family, closed the door behind him and set a leather briefcase on the dining table. "We have 6 men positioned around the valley, another 12 arriving tonight. I've secured communications and started running background on everyone connected to this development scheme." He opened the briefcase, revealing files, photos, and a tablet displaying financial records. "Victor Drayton," Vittorio began, pulling out an 8x10 photograph of a man in his 60s with a practiced smile and dead eyes. Former real estate magnate from Los Angeles. 3 bankruptcies, 2 under investigation for fraud. He partnered with Mayor Pike 18 months ago. The resort project is financed through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. He laid out more photos, bank transfer records, property deeds, wire transfers. But here's where it gets interesting, Vittorio continued. The shell company receives funding from Sinaloa-adjacent money launderers. This isn't just corruption. This is cartel capital looking for a legitimate investment to clean itself through. Alberico studied the documents with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining an X-ray. How deep does it go? Sheriff Harlan's on the payroll, $50,000 deposited monthly into an offshore account. Wade Kempler gets 10. There are 6 other enforcers working the valley, pressuring holdouts. And Pike himself? Vittorio tapped a spreadsheet showing a numbered account in Grand Cayman. He's cleared $2 million so far, with another 5 promised once the resort breaks ground. Elena's teacup rattled slightly against its saucer. Alberico's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very, very cold. "Mama," he said quietly, still looking at the documents. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" "Always." He finally turned to face her, and for just a moment, Elena saw the boy she'd raised, the child who'd protected her through poverty and violence, who'd become something dark and dangerous so she could live safely in the light. "Then understand this," Alberico said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I'm not calling the FBI. I'm not filing lawsuits. I'm not waiting for justice to work its way through courts that these people already own." He glanced at Vittorio, then back to his mother. "We take them apart from the inside. Every lie they've told, every bribe they've paid, every person they've threatened, it all comes down. And when it's finished, Frost Peak will be free." Outside, 3 black SUVs rolled silently through the mountain darkness, their headlights cutting through the October night. The Angelo family had come to Colorado, and Frost Peak's corrupt empire was about to learn what happens when you touch the wrong man's mother. The chapel sat at the edge of Frost Peak like a forgotten prayer, a small wooden structure with peeling white paint and a modest steeple that pointed toward mountains indifferent to human pleas for salvation. It had been built in 1887 by miners seeking forgiveness, and now, more than a century later, it served mainly as a landmark tourists photographed, but rarely entered. Elena pushed open the heavy oak door, its hinges protesting with a soft groan. Pale afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across empty pews worn smooth by generations of knees and worry. The air smelled of old wood, candle wax, and the particular silence that only exists in spaces built for confession. She had received the message that morning. A folded note slipped beneath her cabin door, while Alberico and Vittorio worked in the converted war room. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, desperate. "I have information you need. The chapel. 2 p.m. Please come alone. I'm risking everything. E.P." Elena knew who E.P. was. Everyone in Frost Peak knew Evelyn Pike, the mayor's wife, a woman who existed in perfectly tailored silence beside her husband at ribbon cuttings and town meetings, her smile practiced to the point of erasure. Elena took a seat in the 3rd pew, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. 10 minutes later, the door opened again. Evelyn Pike stepped inside, and Elena was startled by how different she looked away from her husband's shadow. The woman was in her early 50s, with ash-blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail rather than her usual elaborate styling. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, no jewelry, no makeup, no armor. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands trembled as she clutched a canvas bag to her chest. "Mrs. Marino," Evelyn whispered, glancing back at the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Please, sit." Elena patted the pew beside her with the same gentle authority she'd used on frightened children throughout her life. Evelyn sank onto the worn wood, the bag still clutched against her like a shield. For a long moment, she simply stared at the altar, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "I saw the video," she finally said, her voice breaking. "What Wade did to you. And I saw my husband on television, lying, blaming you, protecting the men who hurt you. And she pressed her fist against her mouth, fighting for composure. "I can't be silent anymore. I can't." Elena waited, patient as mountains. "I've been married to Ronald for 28 years, Evelyn continued. "I watched him change. It was slow at first, small compromises, little ethical shortcuts he justified as practical politics. But then Victor Drayton arrived with his resort project and his offshore accounts and his cartel money. And Ronald. She shook her head. He sold this town. He sold his soul. And I stayed quiet because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Elena asked gently. Of him. Of what he'd become. Of what he might do if I left or spoke out. Evelyn's hands shook harder. But then I saw that video of you, a woman his age, my age, being struck while people watched. And I realized staying quiet makes me complicit. It makes me just as guilty. She opened the canvas bag and began pulling out items, spreading them across the pew between them like evidence in a trial where God himself might serve as judge. First came leather-bound ledgers, accounting books filled with columns of numbers, dates, and coded notations. These are the real financial records, Evelyn explained. Not the sanitized versions Ronald shows the town council. Every bribe he's paid, every property seized through coercion, every dollar laundered through the resort project. Next, a manila folder thick with documents. Bribe lists. Sheriff Harlan, Wade Kempler, 6 other enforcers, county inspectors who looked the other way, state environmental officials who approved permits they should have rejected. It's all here: who got paid, how much, when. Then a stack of printed emails and text messages. Communications between Ronald, Drayton, and the cartel investors. They're careful they use code words, but you can see the pattern. Threats against holdouts who wouldn't sell. Plans to contaminate water supplies. Instructions for Wade to apply pressure to specific families. Finally, a small external hard drive. Recordings. Ronald keeps files on everyone as insurance-compromising footage, audio confessions, surveillance. He's paranoid about being betrayed, so he documents everything, including town meetings where he and Drayton planned forced evictions. Elena stared at the evidence spread before her, decades of corruption distilled into paper and digital memory. "Why are you giving this to me?" Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer. Evelyn met her eyes, and in that gaze Elena saw exhaustion, shame, and the faint flicker of something that might have been hope. "Because you're the only person in Frost Peak who has real protection. Your son." She hesitated, then pressed forward. "I know who he is. I recognize the tattoos. I've seen enough crime documentaries, heard enough whispered stories. Alberico Angelo, the Angelo family." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'm terrified of him, Mrs. Marino. Absolutely terrified. But I trust him more than I trust the FBI, because the FBI can be bought or buried in bureaucracy. Your son?" She gave a bitter, exhausted laugh. "Your son makes problems disappear permanently." Elena's expression remained gentle, but she didn't deny anything. "I'm not asking for protection," Evelyn continued. "I don't deserve it. I stayed quiet too long. But I'm begging you, use this information. Expose them. Destroy them. Free this town from what my husband and his partners have done to it." Elena carefully gathered the ledgers, the folder, the hard drive, placing each item back in the canvas bag with reverent care, not for the corruption they documented, but for the courage it took to betray 28 years of loyalty to a man who'd stopped deserving it. "What will you do now?" Elena asked. "I've already filed for divorce. The papers were served this morning. I'm staying with my sister in Boulder until—" She trailed off, then forced herself to continue. "Until your son finishes whatever he's going to do. And then I'll testify. Against Ronald, against Drayton, against all of them. If I survive that long." Elena reached out and took Evelyn's trembling hand in her own weathered one. "You did the right thing," Elena said firmly. "And you will survive this. I give you my word." Evelyn's composure finally shattered. She leaned against Elena's shoulder and wept deep, wrenching sobs that echoed off the chapel's wooden rafters, carrying decades of complicity and shame and the desperate hope that confession might lead to something resembling redemption. Elena held her, this stranger who'd just betrayed her husband to save her conscience, and wondered not for the first time what price her own son had paid to become the kind of man people like Evelyn feared more than the law itself. That evening, in the cabin's war room, Alberico sat before a laptop, methodically scanning through Evelyn Pike's evidence, the ledgers, the emails, the recordings. His face remained expressionless, but Vittorio, who'd known him for 20 years, could read the subtle signs, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the set of his jaw, the absolute stillness that preceded calculated violence. "It's worse than we thought," Vittorio said quietly. "No." Alberico's voice was cold as mountain stone. "It's exactly what we needed." He closed the laptop and pulled out his phone, scrolling through his encrypted contacts. "We're not calling the FBI," he said, echoing his earlier promise to his mother. "We're calling our people." He pressed dial. "Somewhere in New Jersey, A phone rang in a restaurant backroom where men who made federal witnesses disappear were eating dinner. "It's Alberico," he said when the line connected. "I need the full intelligence team in Colorado. 48 hours. We're taking apart a corrupt network, and I want it done the old way." He paused, listening. Then, "No. No bodies. Just complete financial and political destruction. I want them alive, broken, and confessing on camera." Another pause. "Because my mother asked me not to kill anyone." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "And I don't break promises to her." He ended the call and looked at Vittorio. "We take them apart from the inside," Alberico said. "Every account, every ally, every escape route. And when we're finished, Frost Peak will be free, and every corrupt man who touched my mother will beg for prison as mercy. If you believe no elderly mother should ever face corruption alone, subscribe. Your support helps these powerful stories reach more people who need to hear them." The transformation of Elena's lakeside cabin happened overnight, like a military operation conducted in absolute silence. By dawn, the modest living room had become something else entirely, a nerve center that would have looked at home in a federal task force command post, except the men operating it answered to no government, swore no oaths to any constitution, and operated by rules written in blood and loyalty rather than law. 3 additional laptops now covered the dining table, their screens displaying real-time surveillance feeds from cameras positioned throughout Frost Peak. The large monitor on the wall had been upgraded to a split screen showing property maps, financial flowcharts, and a network diagram connecting every corrupt official in the valley like a spider's web waiting to be burned. Alberico stood before the display, a tablet in his hand, his dark eyes tracking data streams with the focused intensity of a general planning an invasion. He'd been awake for 36 hours straight, sustained by black coffee and the cold fury that had settled into his bones the moment Wade Kempler's hand struck his mother's face. Vittorio worked at the main laptop, his fingers moving across the keyboard with surprising speed for a man his age. Around him, 4 other Angelo family operatives, hand-picked, trusted, lethal, moved with quiet efficiency. There was Dante, the surveillance specialist, a lean man in his 30s with wireframe glasses and the kind of unremarkable face that disappeared in crowds. He monitored 6 screens simultaneously, tracking Sheriff Harlan's patrol routes, Wade Kempler's movements, and the comings and goings at Mayor Pike's office. Beside him sat Luca, the financial investigator, whose gift for finding hidden money had bankrupted 3 rival families over the past decade. He was currently unraveling Victor Drayton's shell company structures, following digital breadcrumbs through the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, and back to cartel accounts in Mexico. Near the window, pretending to read a newspaper but actually watching approach roads through high-powered binoculars, was Tommaso, head of physical security, built like a brick wall with hands that could break bones or defuse bombs with equal precision. And in the kitchen, making espresso with the care of a man performing a sacred ritual, was Father Marco, not actually a priest, despite the nickname, but a communications specialist who could intercept, decrypt, and redirect any signal passing through Frost Peak's cellular towers. Elena had retreated to the cabin's small bedroom, giving her son and his men space to work, though the closed door did nothing to shield her from the reality of what she'd invited into her sanctuary. She could hear their low voices, the click of keyboards, the occasional cryptic exchange about targets and leverage points and pressure applications. She sat on the edge of her bed, rosary beads moving slowly through her weathered fingers, not praying for divine intervention, but for her son's soul, which she feared was sliding further into darkness with each calculated move he made. A soft knock interrupted her meditation. "Mama?" Alberico's voice muffled through the door. "May I come in?" "Of course." He entered, closing the door behind him, and for a moment he was just her son again, tired, concerned, carrying the weight of protection like Atlas carried the world. He sat beside her on the bed, his expensive coat replaced by a simple black shirt, the tattoos on his neck and arms visible in the afternoon light filtering through curtains. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Elena set down her rosary beads and took his hand, his right hand, the one bearing ink of a serpent coiled around a dagger, the Angelo family mark of enforcement. "I'm worried about you," she answered honestly. "Not about what those men might do to me, about what this is doing to you." Alberico's jaw tightened. "They hurt you, and you're hurt because of it." She squeezed his hand. "I see it in your eyes, my darling boy. Every time you look at that bruise on my cheek, you go somewhere dark, somewhere I can't follow." "Good," he said, though his voice carried no conviction. Let me go there alone. It's what I do. It's what I've always done, so you don't have to. But at what cost? The question hung between them like smoke. Before Alberico could answer, Vittorio appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, his expression urgent but controlled. We have movement, he said simply. In the war room, the team had gathered around Dante's surveillance station. One of his screens showed grainy footage from a camera positioned near Wade Kempler's trailer on the outskirts of town, a rusted single-wide surrounded by broken equipment and beer cans. Two men approached the trailer from opposite directions, moving with the practiced coordination of people who'd worked together before. Both wore sheriff's deputy uniforms. Both carried service weapons. But their body language was wrong, too tense, too purposeful for a routine call. Deputies Rourke and Chen. Dante identified them, both on Evelyn Pike's bribe list. Both received cash payments last month. What are they doing at Kempler's place? Alberico asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Luca pulled up financial records on his screen. Wade Kempler received his last payment from the Drayton organization 4 days ago, the day before he assaulted Mrs. Marino. But this morning, nothing. His account's been frozen. They're cutting loose ends, Vittorio said grimly. Wade's a liability now. The viral videos made him too visible. And men like Drayton and Pike don't leave liabilities breathing. On screen, the two deputies knocked on Wade's trailer door. After a moment, Wade appeared massive, confused, still wearing the same stained flannel from the diner. They exchanged words too far away for the camera's microphone to catch. Then Deputy Rourke's hand moved toward his weapon. Tommaso, Alberico said, his voice carrying absolute authority. How fast can you get there? Tommaso was already pulling on his coat. 7 minutes, maybe 6. Take Father Marco. Intercept them before shots are fired. I want Wade alive, and I want those deputies breathing but very, very afraid. Understood. Tommaso and Marco moved toward the door with military efficiency. And Tommaso? Alberico called after him. No permanent damage. We need them able to talk. A cold smile flickered across Tommaso's face. Understood, boss. They vanished into the Colorado afternoon, leaving dust swirling in their wake. Alberico turned back to the monitor, watching Wade Kempler, the man who'd struck his mother, standing in his trailer doorway, completely unaware that 2 deputies had been sent to kill him, and that his life was about to be saved by the very people he'd wronged. Why save him? Dante asked quietly. After what he did? Alberico's expression remained unreadable. Because watching corrupt men kill each other teaches no lessons, but showing Wade that his own allies wanted him dead while his victim's son saved him? He glanced toward the bedroom where his mother prayed. That's how you break a man's spirit completely. That's how you get genuine repentance instead of forced confession. Vittorio nodded slowly, recognizing the strategy. You're giving him a chance to choose redemption. No, Alberico corrected. I'm showing him what real power looks like and what mercy costs. And then I'm letting him decide if he deserves either. On the monitor, Deputy Rourke's hand had cleared his holster. Wade's face registered confusion turning to fear. The screen flickered, then went dark. Camera's been disabled, Dante reported. Probably shot out. The room fell silent, everyone watching the blank screen, imagining what was happening 7 miles away in a trailer park where justice and revenge were dancing on a razor's edge. Elena emerged from her bedroom, rosary still wrapped around her hand, and stood beside her son. You saved him, she said softly, not asking, stating. I'm trying to save everyone, Mama, Alberico replied. Even the ones who don't deserve it. That's the difference between you and them, Elena said, touching his cheek, the same gesture she'd used when he was a boy coming home with scraped knees and black eyes from protecting smaller children. You still believe some souls are worth the effort. Alberico's phone buzzed. A text from Tommaso. Package secured. Deputies neutralized. No casualties. Returning to base. He showed his mother the message. Elena closed her eyes briefly, perhaps in relief, perhaps in prayer. And in that moment, the war room fell quiet. 6 dangerous men and 1 elderly widow, all of them understanding that they'd just crossed a line from which there was no retreat. Frost Peak's corrupt empire was being dismantled piece by piece, and the men who'd built it were beginning to realize they'd made a fatal miscalculation. They'd assumed power made them untouchable. They'd forgotten that mercy could be more terrifying than violence, and that a mother's love, when defended by the right son, was the most dangerous force in the world. Wade Kempler's trailer sat like a rusted monument to wasted potential aluminum siding streaked with years of grime, wooden steps sagging under the weight of neglect, and a yard littered with broken machinery that would never be fixed. This was where men came when they'd traded their dignity for small-town power, when they'd become enforcers for corrupt empires and forgotten what it felt like to look at themselves in mirrors. Wade sat at his kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey before him, his massive hands trembling as he lifted the glass to his lips. He'd been drinking since noon, not from celebration, but from the creeping realization that something had shifted in Frost Peak's criminal ecosystem, and he was suddenly on the wrong side of it. The viral videos haunted him. His face, red and furious, captured in high definition as his hand connected with an elderly woman's cheek. 8 million views, 10 million. Comments calling him a coward, a monster, worse. His phone had been ringing constantly blocked numbers, threatening voicemails, journalists trying to interview the Frost Peak bully. But worse than the public shame was the silence from the people who'd protected him. Mayor Pike hadn't returned his calls. Victor Drayton's secretary claimed he was unavailable. Even Sheriff Harlan, who'd always had his back, now dodged him at every turn. Wade had been an enforcer for 18 months, doing their dirty work, applying pressure to holdouts who wouldn't sell, and now, suddenly, he was alone. His phone buzzed with an incoming text. "Your account has been frozen pending investigation." Wade stared at the message, his alcohol-fogged brain struggling to process the implications. The account where Drayton deposited his monthly payments, $10,000, his livelihood, gone. Another buzz. "This is Deputy Rourke. Need to talk. Coming by in 10 minutes. Wade set down his glass, unease prickling along his spine. Rourke and Chen were Pike's men, corrupt to the bone, willing to do anything for the right price. Why would they be coming here now, when everyone else was cutting him loose? The answer arrived with terrible clarity. They're not coming to talk. His hands stopped trembling. Fear burned through the whiskey fog, leaving cold, sharp sobriety in its wake. Wade stood and moved to his bedroom, pulling open the nightstand drawer where he kept his .38 revolver. His fingers closed around the grip just as he heard boots on the wooden steps outside. 2 sets of footsteps. A knock on the door, hard, authoritative, the kind of knock that expected immediate compliance. "Wade, Sheriff's Department, open up." Wade moved to the window, peering through the grimy curtain. Deputies Rourke and Chen stood on his porch, both with hands resting on their service weapons, not drawn, but ready. Their body language was all wrong, too tense, too focused. This wasn't a welfare check. Wade's heart hammered against his ribs. He was trapped. The trailer only had 2 exits: the front door where the deputies waited, and a back door that opened onto an empty field with no cover for 200 yards. He opened the front door a crack, keeping his own weapon hidden behind his back. "What do you want?" Wade's voice came out rougher than intended. "Need to talk to you about the situation with Mrs. Marino," Rourke said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Mayor wants to make sure we're all on the same page before the media circus gets worse." "Then why didn't Pike call me himself?" "He's dealing with lawyers. You know how it is." Rourke's hand shifted closer to his holster. "Can we come in? This is a conversation better had in private." Wade's finger tightened on his own weapon. "I think we're private enough right here." Chen moved slightly to the left, flanking, creating a crossfire angle. The movement was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who'd ever been in a real fight. They were positioning for a kill shot. "Wade, don't make this difficult," Rourke said, his voice dropping the pretense of friendliness. "You're a loose end. You understand what that means, right? You're all over the internet. You made yourself a liability, and the people we work for don't tolerate liabilities. So they sent you to clean up their mess." Wade's voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of a man who'd just realized exactly how disposable he'd always been. "It's nothing personal," Chen added, as if that made murder more palatable. "You got paid well for 18 months. Consider this early retirement." Rourke's hand closed around his weapon's grip. Wade raised his own gun, finger sliding toward the trigger, knowing he was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and probably seconds from death. The sound of engines roared suddenly from both sides of the trailer. 2 black vehicles, an SUV and a pickup truck, skidded to simultaneous stops, blocking both deputies' cars and cutting off any escape route. Doors flew open. Tommaso emerged from the SUV like a force of nature, 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle and tactical precision. Father Marco exited the passenger side, smaller but moving with the fluid confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was. From the pickup, 2 more Angelo operatives appeared, both armed, both flanking the deputies with professional efficiency. Rourke's weapon cleared his holster. Tommaso moved faster than a man his size had any right to move. 3 steps closed the distance. His hand clamped around Rourke's wrist with crushing force, twisting the gun away while simultaneously sweeping the deputy's legs. Rourke hit the wooden porch with bone-jarring impact, the weapon skittering across weathered boards. Chen drew his own gun. Marco was already behind him, having circled during the distraction. He pressed a taser against Chen's kidney and triggered it. The deputy convulsed and dropped, his weapon falling harmlessly into the dirt. The entire confrontation lasted 8 seconds. Wade stood in his doorway, gun still raised, brain struggling to process what had just happened. He recognized these men from the diner, not all of them, but their presence, their efficiency, the unmistakable aura of people who'd done this 1,000 times before. These were Alberico Angelo's people. Tommaso zip-tied both deputies' hands behind their backs with practiced ease, then looked up at Wade with an expression that contained no sympathy, no judgment, just cold assessment. "Put the gun down," Tommaso said quietly. "We're not here to hurt you." "Then why are you here?" Wade's voice cracked. "Because someone needs to explain to you exactly what's happening." Tommaso hauled both deputies to their feet, shoving them toward one of the vehicles. "And that someone is waiting for you at the lake." "Alberico." Wade said the name like a curse, like a prayer. "Get in the truck," Father Marco said, not unkindly. "You can ride voluntarily, or we can carry you. Your choice. But either way, this conversation is happening." Wade looked at his gun, then at the 4 operatives surrounding him, then at the 2 deputies who'd been sent to murder him, now zip-tied and bleeding. He lowered his weapon. "They were really going to kill me," he said, the realization hitting him with devastating force. "Pike and Drayton. They sent deputies to murder me." "Yes," Tommaso confirmed, "to silence you. Because you're a witness to their corruption, and witnesses are liabilities." He gestured toward the truck. "But Mrs. Marino's son?" He stopped it. "The man whose mother you struck saved your life 30 seconds before you would have bled out on this porch." Wade's legs went weak. He leaned against the doorframe, his mind reeling. "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "That," Father Marco said, "is exactly what you're going to ask him yourself." 20 minutes later, Wade Kempler sat in Elena's lakeside cabin, surrounded by the war room's technology and the silent, watchful presence of Angelo family operatives. His hands were free, no zip ties, no restraints, but 6 men capable of killing him without breaking a sweat stood between him and the door. Alberico sat across from him, separated by the coffee table, his dark eyes fixed on Wade with the same cold intensity from the diner. Elena emerged from her bedroom, and Wade flinched, actually physically recoiled at the sight of the woman he'd struck, the bruise still visible on her cheek like an accusation written in flesh. She met his eyes with something that looked impossibly like compassion. "Mr. Kempler," she said softly, "my son has something to show you." Vittorio pressed play on a laptop. The screen filled with audio recordings, Mayor Pike's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Wade's become a problem. Too visible. Take care of it tonight. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong." Then Drayton's voice. "Agreed." He knew the risks when he signed on. Loose ends get clipped. Wade's face went white. Alberico leaned forward, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "They used you, paid you, and when you became inconvenient, they tried to kill you." He paused, letting that sink in. "I saved you, Wade. Not because you deserve it, you don't, but because you're going to make a choice right now that determines whether you die a corrupt coward or live long enough to earn back a fraction of your humanity." Wade's hands trembled. "What choice?" "Repent," Elena said simply. "Publicly, completely. Confess every crime you committed under their orders. Help us expose them. And then spend whatever time you have left repairing the damage you've done to this town." "And if I refuse?" Alberico's expression didn't change. "Then I return you to your trailer, and let Rourke and Chen finish what they started." The unraveling began at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, when Victor Drayton's primary offshore account, the one holding $8.3 million in cartel-laundered resort funding, simply ceased to exist. Not frozen, not seized by federal authorities, just gone. Every transaction reversed, every wire transfer redirected back to its source, every investment liquidated and scattered across 200 micro-accounts in jurisdictions where recovery would take years of litigation that Drayton couldn't afford. Luca, the Angelo family's financial specialist, watched the digital carnage unfold across his monitors with the satisfaction of an artist completing a masterpiece. 27 hours of work, 17 different shell companies penetrated, 5 separate banking security systems bypassed, and now Victor Drayton's entire criminal empire was hemorrhaging money like a severed artery. Cayman accounts, empty, Luca reported to Alberico, who stood behind him nursing black coffee in the pre-dawn darkness. Luxembourg holding companies. Dissolved. Mexican cartel accounts. Reverse transactions flagged for investigation by their own money launderers. Alberico's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes tracked every number disappearing from Drayton's balance sheets with cold satisfaction. How long before he notices? Alberico asked. He probably already has. But he won't understand the scope until his lawyers start calling in about 6 hours. Luca pulled up another screen showing a cascade of automatic payment failures. His construction contracts? Defaulted due to insufficient funds. His payroll to the enforcers? Bounced. His monthly bribes to Sheriff Harlan and the others? Returned for non-existent accounts. And the cartel investors? Luca's smile was thin and dangerous. They received notifications that their money was lost due to Drayton's mismanagement. He'll be getting very angry phone calls from very dangerous people within the hour. Vittorio entered the war room, tablet in hand, his expression grim. Mayor Pike's political support is collapsing. 3 state representatives who backed his development project withdrew their endorsements overnight. The Colorado Attorney General's office opened an inquiry into Frost Peak's land deals, and the town council just called an emergency meeting without Pike's knowledge to discuss a vote of no confidence. Evelyn's evidence? Alberico asked. Anonymous copies were delivered to every council member, along with selected journalists, the State Ethics Commission, and a victims' advocacy group representing the families Pike's administration pressured into selling. Vittorio scrolled through news alerts on his tablet. The Denver Post is running a full exposé tomorrow. They're calling it the Frost Peak Land Grab, how cartel money and corrupt officials stole a mountain town. Dante looked up from his surveillance monitors. Sheriff Harlan's having a very bad morning. 4 of his deputies resigned overnight, the clean ones who weren't on the bribe list. They submitted their resignations along with sworn statements about harassment they witnessed but were ordered to ignore. Harlan's down to 6 men, and 3 of them are currently in our custody. He gestured to a monitor showing deputies Rourke and Chen, still zip-tied in a secure location, being interviewed on camera by Father Marco. Their confessions were detailed, damning, and completely voluntary. Fear was a powerful motivator when men realized their own allies had made them disposable. Wade Kempler? Alberico asked. Rehearsing his statement with Mrs. Marino, Tommaso reported from his position by the window. He's terrified, broken, but surprisingly genuine. I think your mother's actually getting through to him. In the cabin's small bedroom, Elena sat across from Wade, who looked like he'd aged a decade in 48 hours. His massive frame seemed diminished, shoulders hunched under the weight of consequences he'd spent 18 months pretending didn't exist. I hurt people, Wade said, his voice raw from hours of confession. Not just you, ma'am. I threatened families. I cut fences. I poisoned livestock to make people desperate enough to sell. He pressed his palms against his eyes. I told myself it was just business, that I was just following orders, that the money made it okay. But it didn't, Elena said gently. No. Wade's hands dropped to his lap, revealing red-rimmed eyes. It made me a monster, and when your son walked through that diner door, I saw myself clearly for the first time in years. I saw what I'd become. And what had you become? The kind of man my father would have been ashamed to know. Wade's voice broke. He was a contractor honest, hardworking, built half the houses in this valley with his own hands. He taught me that a man's word was his bond, that you earned respect through integrity. He laughed bitterly. And I threw all of that away for $10,000 a month in the illusion of power. Elena reached across the space between them and placed her weathered hand on his. Then honor your father's memory now, she said firmly. Tell the truth, face the consequences, and spend whatever time you have left rebuilding what you helped destroy. Wade stared at her hand on his, the hand of the woman he'd struck, offering him something that looked impossibly like forgiveness. Why are you being kind to me? He whispered. After what I did? Because my son taught me something a long time ago, Elena replied. He said that mercy isn't about whether someone deserves it, it's about whether you can live with yourself if you don't offer it. And I've lived too long to carry the weight of hatred. Wade's shoulders began to shake. This giant of a man, this enforcer who'd terrorized an entire valley, wept like a child discovering that redemption might still be possible. By noon, Frost Peak's corrupt infrastructure was in freefall. Victor Drayton's lawyer called an emergency press conference to announce that the resort project was indefinitely suspended due to unforeseen financial complications. The lawyer's hands shook as he read the prepared statement, and he refused to take questions. Behind him, barely visible in the background, 2 large men in expensive suits, not police, not lawyers, But the kind of men who collected cartel debts watched Drayton with expressions that promised painful conversations to come. Mayor Pike barricaded himself in his office, ignoring the town council members pounding on his door demanding his resignation. His phone rang continuously, blocked numbers, threatening calls, journalists seeking comment on the leaked evidence. Through his window, he could see news vans lining the street, their satellite dishes pointed toward the sky like mechanical vultures waiting for death. Sheriff Harlan sat alone in his station, staring at his computer screen where his offshore account balance had dropped from $850,000 to zero overnight. His service weapon lay on the desk before him. His hand hovered near it, trembling, as he considered options that grew narrower by the minute. The Angelo family had done in 48 hours what federal investigators might have taken years to accomplish. They'd isolated every corrupt official, severed every financial lifeline, destroyed every alliance, and left their targets alone with their crimes and their fear. And they'd done it without firing a single shot. At the lakeside cabin, Alberico stood on the porch, watching sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. His mother joined him, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the evening chill. "It's almost over," Elena said quietly. "Not yet." Alberico's voice carried the weight of unfinished business. "They're panicking, but panic makes men desperate. Desperate men make dangerous choices." As if summoning prophecy into being, Dante burst through the door. "Boss Sheriff Harlan just left his station. He's heading east on Highway 91, driving fast. And he's not alone, he's got 2 vehicles following him. Looks like he's running." Alberico's expression hardened. "Where does Highway 91 lead?" "State line. 45 minutes to Wyoming if he doesn't stop." Vittorio was already pulling up a map on his tablet. "There's a private airstrip 30 miles from here, small, mostly used by wealthy tourists. If Harlan's got an exit strategy, that's where he's heading." Alberico turned to Tommaso. "How fast can we intercept?" "If we leave now, we can beat him there by 10 minutes. Then move." Alberico's voice carried absolute authority. "I want him alive and talking. No injuries, no violence. Just the reality that running won't save him." Tommaso and 3 operatives were out the door before Alberico finished speaking, engines roaring to life in the mountain evening. Elena watched them disappear down the winding road, then looked at her son with maternal concern that went deeper than words. "When does it end?" she asked softly. "The fear? The running? The desperate attempts to escape consequences?" Alberico's jaw tightened. "When every man who touched you understands that power built on corruption always collapses, and that the only thing more dangerous than breaking the law." He paused, his dark eyes reflecting the dying light. "Is breaking a promise to the wrong man's mother." The private airstrip lay 28 miles east of Frost Peak, a single strip of cracked asphalt carved into a high plateau where wind howled like judgment. Sheriff Mace Harlan's cruiser fishtailed onto the gravel approach, headlights cutting frantic swaths through the darkness. Behind him, 2 unmarked sedans, cartel muscle hired by Drayton, closed the gap like wolves scenting blood. Harlan's knuckles were white on the wheel. His offshore account was empty. His deputies were gone. His authority had evaporated overnight. All that remained was the duffel in the passenger seat, $47,000 in cash, a fake passport, and a one-way ticket to anywhere that didn't know his name. He never saw the black SUVs until they materialized from the tree line, engines silent until the last second. Tommaso's lead vehicle fishtailed across the runway, blocking the path. Tires screamed. Harlan slammed the brakes, his cruiser skidding sideways into a chain-link fence. Doors opened in unison. 4 Angelo operatives emerged, weapons holstered, faces calm. Harlan fumbled for his service revolver, hands shaking so badly he dropped it onto the floor mat. Tommaso yanked the driver's door open. "Out." Harlan stumbled into the cold, breath fogging. "You can't do this. I'm the sheriff." "You were," Tommaso corrected. He zip-tied Harlan's wrists with the same efficiency he'd used on the deputies. "Now you're a witness." A tablet was thrust into Harlan's face. Father Marco's voice, calm as confession. "Start talking. Every bribe, every threat, every order you gave to look the other way. We stop recording when you run out of sins." Harlan's knees buckled. He began to speak names, dates, dollar amounts, his voice cracking like thin ice. The cartel sedans arrived seconds later, but Angelo operatives were already waiting. 2 drivers were disarmed, hooded, and loaded into a van. Their screams echoed across the plateau, swallowed by the wind. Mayor Ronald Pike sat alone in his darkened office, the American flag behind his desk casting long shadows. The town council had voted 7-0 for his removal. His wife's divorce papers lay signed on the blotter. His phone displayed 17 missed calls from a Mexican number he'd once bragged about. He opened his desk drawer. The .38 revolver felt heavier than memory. Pike pressed the barrel under his chin, finger trembling on the trigger. The door exploded inward. Vittorio stepped through the splintered frame, 2 operatives behind him. Not today, Ronald. Pike's hand was twisted away before the shot fired. The bullet buried itself in the ceiling. Vittorio's grip was iron. You don't get the easy way out. You get the public way. They dragged him to the town square, where news cameras waited under floodlights. Pike's suit was rumpled, his face streaked with tears and snot. Vittorio shoved a microphone into his hand. Confess, he said simply. Pike looked at the crowd. Neighbors he'd betrayed, families he'd ruined. His voice broke as he began. I sold Frost Peak for $2 million and a promise of more. Victor Drayton's Gulfstream sat on the tarmac at Denver International, engines spooling up for a midnight departure to Grand Cayman. He paced the cabin, barking at his pilot. Move! They're coming! The plane lurched forward, then stopped. Black SUVs formed a wall across the runway, headlights blinding. Drayton peered through the window, face draining of color. Alberico Angelo stepped out of the lead vehicle, coat billowing in the jet wash. Drayton bolted for the cockpit. Go around them. The pilot's hands froze on the throttle. They've got vehicles on both sides. We can't. The cabin door was torn open. Luca and Dante boarded like ghosts, moving with lethal grace. Drayton swung a briefcase. Luca caught his wrist, twisted, and dropped him to the carpet. Alberico entered last, his presence filling the small space. He knelt beside Drayton, voice soft. You financed this with blood money. You sent a bully to strike my mother. Now you'll face the people you tried to bury. Drayton whimpered. I can pay. Name your price. Alberico's smile was winter. Your price is confession. On camera. For every family you terrorized. They dragged him down the steps into the glare of waiting news crews. Drayton screams, I'll give you everything. Were drowned by camera shutters. By dawn, all 3 men sat in separate interrogation rooms at the state police barracks, under federal guard. Harlan's confession filled 12 hours of tape. Pike's public breakdown played on loop across every network. Drayton's tear-streaked face, begging for mercy he'd never shown, became the image that broke the internet. In the lakeside cabin, Elena watched the news with quiet eyes. Alberico stood behind her, hand on her shoulder. They're all talking, he said. Elena's fingers traced the fading bruise on her cheek. And the town? Listening. He paused. Tomorrow, Wade speaks. Then we finish this. Outside, the mountains stood silent, their peaks catching the first light of a new day, one where corruption had been dragged into the open, and 3 fallen men learned that some debts could never be paid with money. The Frost Peak Community Hall smelled of old pine and fresh coffee. Every seat was taken, every aisle packed. Farmers in flannel stood shoulder to shoulder with retirees in down vests. Children sat on parents' laps. The air crackled with anticipation, and the low hum of whispered prayers. At the front, a single microphone waited on a folding table. Behind it hung the American flag and a hand-painted banner. Truth Tonight. Wade Kempler shuffled onto the stage, shoulders hunched, hands trembling. The man who once filled doorways now looked small under the fluorescent lights. His flannel shirt was clean, pressed by Elena's own hands. His eyes were red-rimmed, swollen from crying in the chapel the night before. The room fell silent. He gripped the microphone like a lifeline. My name is Wade Kempler, he began, voice cracking. 18 months ago, I sold my soul for $10,000 a month. I cut fences, poisoned wells, threatened families until they sold land they'd owned for generations. I told myself it was business. A woman in the 3rd row, Mrs. Larson, whose barn he'd torched, stood up, tears streaming. You burned my husband's legacy. Wade's knees buckled. I know. I remember every name, every face. I see them when I close my eyes. His voice broke. I struck Mrs. Marino, a 79-year-old widow, in front of all of you. And not one of you stopped me, because I made you afraid to. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rosie Calder, standing near the back with her phone recording, wiped her eyes. Wade pulled a folded paper from his pocket, Elena's handwriting visible on the creases. This is a list. Every property I damaged, every family I hurt. Starting tomorrow, I work for free. I rebuild every fence, every roof, every life I broke. If it takes 20 years, I'll do it. He looked directly at Elena, seated in the front row beside Alberico. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging for the chance to earn it." Silence stretched like a held breath. Then Elena stood. Slowly, deliberately, she walked to the stage. The room watched, stunned, as she took Wade's massive, trembling hand in her small one. "I forgive you," she said clearly, loudly enough for the microphone to catch. "Not because it was easy, but because carrying hate would make me the monster you became." Wade sank to his knees, sobbing into her cardigan. Elena held him like a mother comforting a child who'd finally come home. Rosie's video from the diner began playing on the large screen behind them, raw, unedited, the slap, the spilled coffee. Alberico's voice, "Take your hand off my mother." The room wept openly. A teenage boy in the back row buried his face in his father's shoulder. Alberico remained in his seat, arms crossed, tattoos hidden beneath his coat. His face was stone, but his eyes dark, unreadable, glistened when Elena looked back at him. She rested her hand on his arm, a silent anchor. The town council chair, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Hale, took the microphone next. Sheriff Harlan, Mayor Pike, and Victor Drayton are in federal custody. Their confessions are public record. The resort is dead. The land stays ours. Cheers erupted, raw, cathartic. Someone started clapping. Soon the entire hall thundered. Wade rose, still holding Elena's hand. "I'll testify in court. Every detail, every bribe. And when I'm done, I'll spend the rest of my life making this right." A young father in the audience stood. "My daughter's pony died because of the poison in our creek. You gonna bring him back?" Wade met his eyes. "No, but I'll build her a new barn, and I'll teach her how to care for horses so she never loses another one." The father nodded, tears falling. "Then start tomorrow." Elena returned to her seat. Alberico leaned close. "You didn't have to forgive him." She squeezed his arm. "I forgave him for me, not for him. Hate would have kept me in that diner booth forever." On stage, Mrs. Hale held up a ballot box. Interim mayor election next week. Clean slate, honest hands. The crowd roared approval. Rosie uploaded the town hall footage live. Within minutes, number Frost Peak heels trended nationwide. As the meeting ended, people approached Wade not with fists, but with lists. Fences to mend, wells to clean, a chance to rebuild trust, one nail at a time. Elena watched from the doorway, Alberico's shadow at her side. The mountains outside glowed under a full moon, their peaks no longer crowned with corruption's shadow. Frost Peak had spoken, and for the first time in years, its voice was its own. 6 months later, spring had melted the last of Frost Peak's snow into silver streams that sang down the mountains. The resort signs were gone, replaced by wildflowers pushing through fresh-turned earth. The town breathed again. Elena's lakeside cabin smelled of lilacs and lemon polish. She stood at the kitchen window, watching Wade Kempler shirtless, sunburned, muscles corded from honest labor hammer the final board onto the Larsons' new barn. The structure gleamed white against the green valley, a promise kept. Mrs. Larson's daughter, 8-year-old Lily, led a chestnut foal on a rope beside him. Wade knelt, letting her trace the scar on his knuckles, the one from the night he'd punched through his own trailer wall in shame. "That's where I learned pain can build or break," he told her. Lily nodded solemnly, then hugged his neck. Elena smiled, tears pricking. The bruise on her cheek was long gone, but the memory lived in softer places now. Rosie Calder's new watchdog channel, Peak Truth, streamed from the diner's corner booth. Her latest episode, 6 Months of Second Chances, had 2 million views. She interviewed Wade weekly, live, no edits. Viewers sent donations, lumber, paint, hope. In the town square, a bronze plaque replaced Pike's portrait. "For the people, by the people, never again." Beneath it, Evelyn Pike's name was etched as the whistleblower who'd risked everything. She'd testified remotely from witness protection, voice disguised. But Frost Peak knew her courage. Victor Drayton's assets funded a community land trust. Harlan's pension paid restitution. Pike's mansion became a women's shelter. Justice, paid in full. Alberico arrived unannounced, as always. Black coat, tattoos hidden under long sleeves, eyes scanning every shadow. He carried a single white rose. Elena met him on the porch. "You came." "I promised." He placed the rose in her hand. "No one touches you again. Not while I breathe." They walked the diner together. The bell chimed like a memory. Rosie poured coffee without asking. The booth where it happened now held a small plaque. "Courage begins with one voice." Patrons nodded respectfully. A retired miner pressed Alberico's shoulder. Thank you, son. Alberico only inclined his head, the weight of gratitude heavier than any threat. Outside, Wade approached, hat in hand. Mrs. Marino, I finished the Hales roof, and I enrolled in night classes construction management. Want to make sure I build right from now on. Elena touched his arm. Proud of you, Wade. He swallowed hard. Your boy gave me a life I didn't deserve. I won't waste it. Alberico watched, silent. When Wade walked away, Elena asked, Will you stay? He shook his head. My world's louder than this one. But I'll always come when you call. She hugged him fiercely. You brought peace, Alberico. Let it hold you too. He closed his eyes, breathing in pine and safety. For one heartbeat, the predator rested. At dusk, he stood alone in the diner doorway. Rosie slipped him a to-go cup. For the road. And thank you. For all of us. He nodded once, then stepped into the twilight. The black SUV idled on the mountain road. Vittorio waited in the passenger seat, tablet dark for once. Everything quiet. Quiet enough. Alberico slid behind the wheel. The engine purred to life. As they crested the ridge, Frost Peak's lights flickered on below, warm, steady, unafraid. Elena's cabin glowed like a beacon. Wade's hammer echoed faintly, rebuilding what he'd broken. Alberico's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Drive. The SUV disappeared into the darkening pines, coat and tattoos fading into shadow. A dangerous guardian, returning to the night. But behind him, a town slept in peace it had earned. And somewhere, a mother's prayer followed her son into the dark. Let the light you gave them find its way back to you. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.